I'm Dr. Lauren Lawson, and over the next 45 minutes, I'm going to walk you through the exact four phases that I take every therapist through that I work with when we're building a nonprofit therapy practice. So, whether you're 3 months into thinking about this or 3 years deep, my hope is that by the time we wrap up, you have a complete mental map of what it actually takes to do this and to know exactly where you're at in the process. So I'm also going to put in the chat the link to a handout. So you can download that handout and use it for whenever you need to, or you could follow along with it. So with that, we're going to dive into it. Quick intro for people that don't know me. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in California and Pennsylvania, and I've been a nonprofit founder for the last 13 years. Over those years, I've started, scaled, and stabilized my nonprofit therapy practice in multiple states. I've written multiple grants, I've written multiple programs, and I've done a lot of advocacy at the state and local level for nonprofit therapy practices. So I've figured out the hard way what works and what blows up your timeline. And so my whole company and business of Lauren Lawson Coaching exists for one reason, and that's to help clinicians build nonprofit therapy practices the right way the first time. It's not to build a private practice with like a nonprofit sticker on it. It's a real mission-driven, sustainable nonprofit. And I've honed in exactly how to do that. So, and that's what we're going to cover today, the four phases of starting a nonprofit therapy practice. That's how I've organized it. That's how I do it in my brain when I'm helping other people start a nonprofit. And so phase one is formation. That's the legal and identity work. Phase two is governance. That's your board and your policies. Phase three is your revenue. That's how you're actually going to pay yourself, have the nonprofit pay itself, and how to bring in revenue consistently. So that includes grants, Medicaid, commercial insurance, sliding scale, cash pay. And then phase four is implementation. So that's everything that turns the paperwork that we've done into an actual operating organization. So for each phase, I'm going to tell you what it actually is and what the biggest pitfalls are in those phases and what to focus on first. So by the end, you'll know exactly which phase you're sitting in and what your next move is. This is the framework that I've been using with my clients for years. It's the framework that I built today's training on. It's called the Therapist Nonprofit Framework. So again, it's those four phases, these four pillars, and they're stacked the way you actually want to build a nonprofit. So formation is at the base because nothing gets started without the formation. And then next is governance, because once you're a legal entity, you have to be governed responsibly in the way that nonprofits need to be governed. Revenue is third because you need a financial model that survives without you grinding out 60 hours a week. And implementation is at the top because that's where it all becomes like real breathing operating organization. So the order really matters. People tend to skip around. The biggest jump that I see is people skip formation and governance and they think, oh, well, I need funding first, so I can't do any of that until I find a grant. So they're trying to apply to grants without actually having the first two phases in place. Or they try to hire a board and hire employees without having bylaws, which is under governance. So that's where like the wheels of this car start to come off. And so we're going to go in order. So we're going to focus on formation, phase one. This is everything from the moment you decide, I want to do this, to the moment where you have a legal entity that the IRS recognizes. So this is your foundation, and everything else builds off of that. And so here's the thing, most people end up rushing it because it feels like paperwork, or they end up avoiding it and never get it done. So most people end up regretting rushing it if they didn't do it correctly and then having to go back and fix the mistakes that they made, like with the IRS application. Or people end up never doing it because none of us like paperwork, and we definitely don't like paperwork that can be unclear and confusing, like IRS paperwork. So then it just kind of stays this pipe dream and never ends up happening. So formation has five pieces to it. your mission and vision, which is number one. So this is what you actually exist to do, right? This is your whole purpose. The next piece is your article of incorporation. This is like your legal birth certificate as a corporation in your state. It's done at the state level. And then you have your initial board on paper, which you need for the IRS application. And then you have to get your EIN, which is super easy to get. You can get it in 5 minutes, but you need your federal tax ID after the state approves you and before the IRS application. And then the final piece that's part of formation is your Form 1023. So this is your application at the IRS level, federal level for 501c3 tax exempt status. These five things together are what makes you a nonprofit in the eyes of every regulator, every funder, and every bank. So I want you to notice what I put first. That's mission and vision, not the legal paperwork, and that's intentional. And what I find when people come see me is that they've maybe done one or two of these five pieces, but not the rest, and they haven't realized that they're actually missing these pieces. So a lot of people want to skip straight to filing the paperwork because that's the part that feels like most productive, right? You're like checking things off, but you don't want to do that. Your mission and your vision are like the single most important thing that you'll write, and you'll write them before you do anything else. You don't have to spend a ton of time on them. They don't have to be perfect, but you need to write them. And the reason is because your mission statement ends up inside your articles of incorporation, inside your bylaws, inside your IRS Form 1023, inside every single grant that you'll apply for, and inside almost every language that you're going to use to either fundraise or put on your website or use to market. And so, if your mission is mushy, every downstream document ends up being mushy, right? If your mission is specific, like we provide accessible mental health services to veterans, um, people in rural areas, or wherever, every downstream document then writes itself. So you don't need to spend a lot of time here, but what you do want to do is get specific about who you are, who you serve, where you serve them, and what you do to create the outcome that you want. That's the vision part, the big outcome by serving them. So that's your foundation. Um, and so I have a formations mini course that I walk you through these first steps. So if you're interested in that mini course, let me know. I can send it to you. It's $97 right now. And by the end of the mini course, you'll have all of this done because we really do want to get this right the first time so that we don't have to pay more in fees by getting the IRS denials. Articles of incorporation. So once you have your mission, you're going to file your articles of incorporation at the state level. Every state is a little bit different, but honestly, the basics are the same. You're telling your state, here's the name of my nonprofit, here's my registered agent, which is usually you, and here are my initial directors. Sometimes your state doesn't even ask for your initial directors, and they may or may not ask for a purpose statement. A purpose statement is not your full mission statement. It's usually just like one sentence that says, hey, we're here to provide mental health services to X community. And so a lot of people get tripped up because they're worried that they're going to file it wrong. But you're looking to file on your state Secretary of State website. You're going to look for nonprofit, public, charity. There's a bunch of different types of nonprofits that you can do, but that's the one that you're looking for, the one that says charitable purposes. And so you need to file your articles of incorporation correctly with the right language. And you'll use that same language when you file the IRS application. So get the language right, and then the state filing honestly takes usually about 48 hours, but usually no more than that. So it's a really, really quick turnaround time to get your articles filed with the state. And for anyone who just hopped on, we are going over the 4 phases. We're only in phase one, formation. So that's what we're going over right now. Okay. The next is getting your EIN as part of formation. So your state recognizes you so that you can then be recognized at the federal level. to get your EIN, which is your employer identification number, you do this from the IRS website. It's your federal tax ID. You can get it online the same day that you file with your state. It's free. Definitely don't pay anybody to get it for you. You'll need this to file the 1023. So once you have your EIN and you filed with the state and the state has approved you, then you're ready to file your Form 1023. This is your application, the 501c3 tax exempt status. So if your annual budget is going to be under $50,000, you can file the 1023 easy. Most of my clients end up using the 1023 easy because they're starting out part-time or they're not really sure what the financials are going to look like. The only time I kind of recommend doing the full 1023 application, which is significantly more money to file, is when you already have a fully operational for-profit practice that you are transitioning into a nonprofit and you're already bringing in more than 50K in annual revenue. It's not short. It's about 25 pages, plus your narrative, plus you need a 3-year budget projection. You need to upload your bylaws, conflict of interest policy. And so it's a much more in-depth application and the price is pretty different. So the easy application right now, I think is $275. And then the 1023 application is, last time I checked, I think it's $600 or $650. So there is a huge price difference. And if you do I get this question a lot. If you do the easy first and you make more than 50,000 in like year 3 or year 2, will you have to go back and redo the 1023? No, you won't have to go back. They both get your full IRS tax exempt status. Um, so it's not like if you accidentally do the easy and then you made more that you have to go back and refile. So, when you submit the EZ application, the turnaround time with the IRS currently is about 2 to 3 weeks. And then if you do the full 1023, it's about 2 to 3 months. It's a pretty short timeline right now. Sometimes, depending on what's happening at the administrative level, like if there's a government shutdown or people are laid off or whatever's happening at the federal level, then that might delay processing. I think in 2025, we started to see really big delays, but then around a year ago, that lightened up, and now we're back to like the 2 to 3 week for the easy and 3 to 4 months for the 1023. So once you get your IRS letter, you're going to get a letter in the mail that says you're officially a 501c3. You then can start taking donations and you're tax deductible, and then you are then eligible to do grants. Anything that you do before that, like insurance applications, Medi-Cal, Medicaid, cash pay, like you can start doing that before you get your letter while you're waiting for it, as long as you're registered at the state level. Now, there's one piece of formation that people forget to do or they don't know to do once you get your IRS letter is you have to go back to the state level and you have to register your nonprofit with your state charitable organization registration. Most states require nonprofits that solicit donations to register annually with their Attorney General's Charitable Organization Division. Each state kind of names it something different, but it's around this name. You can Google it. It is separate from your articles of incorporation. And so if you skip it, then you technically can't legally fundraise in your state. So once you have all these 5 pieces, your mission, your articles, your EIN, 1023, and charitable registration, then phase 1 is complete and you're formed, and the entirely everything else comes after that, right? You can move on to the next step and know that you were set up the right way. So let's move into phase 2. Phase 2 is governance. This is the phase that scares a lot of clinicians because it's the part where you have to start operating like a board run organization instead of like a solo practitioner, or instead of an owner, right? But it's also the phase that makes everything else possible after this. Funders will not give you grants without a real board and governance structure in place, and the IRS won't grant you the 501c3 status without governance documents. So you don't want to skip this part, especially because it includes your bylaws. So it has 4 pieces. This is your board of directors, your bylaws, your core policies that you have to have. So conflict of interest, HIPAA, non-discrimination, And then it's like your operating rhythm, how you meet, how you keep minutes, how you make decisions. Um, so we're gonna go through each one of these and talk about what they mean and like how often the board is like actually involved in the nonprofit day to day. So first there's your board. So for a 501(c)(3), you need a minimum of three directors. The IRS strongly prefers, and most state laws require, that majority of those directors are unrelated to each other, and that there's not like a personal interest within the board of directors. It actually doesn't mean that you can't have family members on the board. It's just strongly preferred. So if you're the founder and you want to serve on the board, that's totally fine. You can do that. But you'll also need two other directors who are independent of you. So it's a real thing to have that. And so you want to make sure you have that check and balance when you're developing your board. Most of the clients that I work with, they start with three directors, including themselves, and then they might grow to five to seven. You don't need to have a large board. That's not necessary. It might be at some point if you become a huge organization, like you might have worked for a nonprofit that has like 12 board members, but that's not necessary. You need a minimum of three, and then it can be helpful to have more if you meet more people who have, connections to donors or grants. Like that's really can move a board forward. So once you have a board, and if you have a big enough organization, you might at some point set up committees. Committees are branches off the board that are in charge of overseeing certain things. So a committee could be about finance. You could have a clinical quality committee. You could have a fundraising committee. And what's important to know about the board of directors and any committees, it's all voluntary. They are not W-2 employees. Okay, so bylaws, these are your operating manual for your nonprofit board. They cover how the board of directors are elected, how meetings are called. It goes over what quorum is. It talks about how officers or board of directors are chosen, how you handle conflict of interest on the board level, and what happens if the nonprofit ever dissolves. So it's kind of like the policy regulation for the board of directors. It doesn't talk about any operational things of the actual nonprofit. You typically do have to send in your bylaws to funders if they ask for them, and other things that you might be applying for, to get money or funding. Your board will also need to know them and reference them if there's a question about a process. You don't want to write them from scratch on the internet. You want to start with a template that's built specifically for 501(c)(3) compliance and then customize from there. So I do have a governance mini course that gives the template for bylaws, specifically therapy-led nonprofits. You also want to have an addition like your board guidebook, which would include like a board job description, conflict of interest policy, your meeting minutes templates, and all of that I give you in this mini course too. All right, so let's go over the three non-negotiable policies that are required by the IRS. That's part of governance, and that's the conflict of interest. So required to go over with every board member and signed annually by every director. You have to disclose a conflict of interest. It doesn't mean that there can't be a conflict of interest, that you just have to disclose it. And then HIPAA, obviously, if you're a behavioral health provider and you're handling protected health information, that one's self-explanatory. And then non-discrimination. Because you're a 501(c)(3) and you serve everyone regardless of identity or background, these three policies like live in your operating binder and they get signed annually, and they typically go in the appendix of every grant proposal. Not every grant asks for them, but a good amount of them do. And then finally, we have your board like how your board actually operates, right? So minimally you need to meet annually. That's a requirement by the IRS. Ideally, you probably want to meet quarterly. And then at some point, if there's a special project going on, you might meet monthly. Every meeting has an agenda. Every meeting has minutes that's taken, and every minute goes into your corporate records. So your treasurer typically presents the finances. And then you might vote on what needs to be voted on if there's a change. And so there's always like a paper trail that documents like, okay, if the board needed to vote on this financial thing that we were talking about, that's documented, that goes in the record, and anyone in the future, even if it's not the same board, can go back and reference that, right? So once these are done, you have these things in place, then you are governed appropriately according to the IRS. So let's jump into phase three. And if you guys have any questions, type it in the chat or you can come off mute and ask. And I'll leave some time at the end for questions too. But phase three is revenue. This is the phase that determines whether your nonprofit survives. And it's also the phase where therapists make the biggest mistakes. So, which is assuming that nonprofits run on grants. It doesn't. Grants are a part of the picture, but if you build your model on grants alone, you're going to be exhausted within 18 months and broken within 24 months. So I'm going to talk about why and what the model I teach is. So this is the model I use. It's called the 40-30-20-10. And you don't have to use all of these parts, but this is like ideal. So 40% of your revenue should come from client generated revenue. So what does that mean? That's insurance, Medicaid, Medicare, sliding scale, private pay, commercial insurance. Someone comes for a service, and you provide that service, they then pay for that service. 30% should come from contracts and partnerships. So that might look like school district contract, um, county behavioral health contracts, going after RFPs that are local and specific to the needs of your area. 20% from grants and foundations, and then 10% from community support, so like fundraising. So when all four of these are working together, then you have a sustainable nonprofit. When one of them goes up or down, the others are there to stabilize you so that no single funder ever represents more than a third of your revenue. So that's how you don't get killed by a bad grant cycle, or if a grant runs out, or if the grant no longer exists, right? And so when you talk about private practice, 100% of the revenue is is coming from client generated revenue because they don't have access to these other funding streams that nonprofits do. And it doesn't mean, again, that you have to have all these other funding streams, but it is really smart to diversify your funding in a nonprofit. So inside that 40% of the client generated revenue, two pieces matter pretty enormously to a charitable nonprofit. That's sliding scale and Medicaid or Medi-Cal. Your sliding scale policy is what makes you a nonprofit instead of a private practice. It says we don't turn anyone away for inability to pay, and here's how we determine what they pay, right? And then you get to make up that policy. There is no hard and fast rule of what a sliding scale policy looks like, but it does need to exist. And then Medicaid or Medi-Cal or even Medicare is the other piece. So in most states, becoming a Medicaid provider for behavioral health requires, some sort of state or county application. Every Medicaid enrollment or Medi-Cal enrollment process is different. California is pretty much the same across the board, but every state is different. So we take Medi-Cal in California. We've been taking that for years, and we take Medicaid in Pennsylvania. And to be honest, both of those are our highest payers, higher than commercial insurance, and they are the bread and butter to our nonprofit because they're consistent, they're stable, they pay on time, and there are endless clients that need services who are on those insurance plans. So if you haven't considered taking Medicaid or Medi-Cal, I highly recommend it. But about 25 to 30% of that 40% ends up being Medicaid or Medi-Cal. So all of this I have in my revenue mini course if you're interested in it. And then let's talk about grants. That's a 20% slice. So here's what most people get wrong. They Google mental health grants and apply to like national foundations that fund nine-figure organizations. You're not going to win those, and it's a waste of your time. You're a brand new local nonprofit. The grants that you're actually going to win are super local community foundations, your county's behavioral health funds, regional health conversion foundations that that exist, civic clubs like Rotary clubs, right? Local United Way. That's where you're going to get grants when you're new. None of these are listed in big national databases, so you have to find them by mapping out your specific region and then doing Google searches, ChatGPT searches. You have to know what to plug in. And so when I work with people and do my Done For You program, everyone gets a region-tailored grant strategy because I'm not just going to put on there apply to a SAMHSA grant because I know you're never going to get it. I want to give you a grant strategy that you're actually going to be likely to get because what's available in like rural Alabama is completely different than what's available in suburban Ohio, right? So one thing that's really important to even find these local grants is to make relationships. This year, I actually had a neighbor, had no idea that this was going to happen, but she's my neighbor. Our kids are the same age. And she works for like a human resources agency that hires for a local major behavioral health organization. And as the human resources agency that does all the hiring and training for those staff, they have money set aside for grants to local nonprofits. And she came to me and she's like, "Hey, your counseling center is a nonprofit, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "Well, you need to apply to this grant. Like you're gonna get it. Number one, I know the grant person who approves these. And number two, I already know that you're approved by the IRS and they only like to give to local grants. I would have never known that existed by Googling it, right? That's something that I had to learn word of mouth, and that's where relationships are really important. So the last piece of phase three is your financials. You do need a 5-year projection from day one, not because anyone expects it to be accurate, but because the act of building it forces you to think through business. Funders will ask for it. The IRS sees a budget in your 1023. Your board needs one to govern. And there are 3 financial rules that I hold every nonprofit to. The first one is target break even or modest surplus in year one. We don't want to start by operating at a loss. Number 2 is building an operating reserve to 3 months minimum. You want to have cash flow. You don't want to be worried about making payroll. And then you want to target 6 months by year 5, like 6 months reserve, right? Number 3 is to keep total salaries at or below 70% of your revenue. And the reason is you don't want your salaries to be so expensive and out of reach that you then don't have a sustainable nonprofit. So the idea is to keep it around 65 or 70% of your total revenue, and that's total salaries across the board. And if you do that, you're going to have a healthy organization because it means your staff is being paid well, but you have enough to cover operating expenses and to have 3 to 6 months of cash flow in your reserves. So those are the 3 rules that will save your organization more times than I can count. All right, let's dive into the last phase, implementation. This is where everything you've done on paper actually goes into practice. You've formed the entity, you've built the board, you've designed the financial model, and now we open the doors and actually see clients. So this is the phase where most clinicians underestimate how much detail there actually is. So I'm going to take you on a walkthrough of like what actually needs to happen. So I run every implementation on a 90-day launch plan, so week by week. So the first 30 days is open your business bank account, set up your EHR, set up payroll, set up your accounting, and get professional liability and directors and officers insurance. Sometimes your D&O insurance is included in your professional liability, so you can see that in there. And then days 30 to 60, this is like credentialing. So starting your CAQH application, apply to TRICARE or Medi-Cal or Medicaid, apply to the VA Community Care Network. Wherever your vision is, that's where you want to start credentialing. You don't want to put that off and you don't want to wait till you get your IRS letter. Number one, because you don't need your IRS letter to do it, but because we know that sometimes these credentialing processes take a long time. You do also want to start to begin community outreach and looking for local grants to go after. You don't have to wait to do that. And then days 60 to 90, see your first clients. Document everything, run your first board meeting, file your first quarterly compliance items, which sometimes is done through your payroll. Most of the time it's done through your payroll. And then 90 days from formation to open. So that's the implementation mini course that I've built. It's a literal week by week plan of what exactly to do. And I'm going to go into a little bit of like what you need to actually operate. And if you see cash clients, by the way, and you already have clients in whether it's a small private practice or sole proprietor, you can start seeing them literally as soon as you get the state approves you. You don't need to wait for anything else to get it going. You need your state and then your bank account. You need an account for it to go into. Okay, so here's your tech stack. This definitely matters more than you think. So I recommend three tools to every person who's starting a nonprofit. I recommend Insora as your EHR. You don't have to use Insora. There's so many out there. And no worries about the replay, Penny. It's good that you hopped on. Um, you can pick any EHR, but the reason why I like Insora is because it can hold up to a lot of clients, it can hold up to a lot of employees, and you can bill Medicaid and Medi-Cal very, very easily through Insora, formerly known as Theranest. And it's pretty affordable compared to other ones. For payroll, I always recommend Gusto. I've used so many different payroll systems, but Gusto has been by far the best. And it handles so many things for you that you don't need to worry about. And then the third thing is QuickBooks Online for accounting. If you register through TechSoup, so TechSoup is an organization that you can register for discounts as a nonprofit. So you do need your 501c3 letter to register for TechSoup, but you can get QuickBooks Online and tons of other discounts as a nonprofit for almost virtually nothing compared to what you would pay as a private practice. So it can get you discounts on like Microsoft 365, Google Workspace, computers, equipment, all kinds of stuff. So you'll want to set that up in the first 30 days and so that you're not patching things later on. Um, and you want to create a flow of like, okay, the client comes in, how do we bill? How do we get paid for the service? How do we then pay our staff? And that's what these three tech stacks do is to build that flow. All right, let's talk about programs and SOPs. Inside your nonprofit, you don't just offer therapy, you offer programs. And so under the nonprofit umbrella, you can have different programs under the nonprofit. Maybe you only want one program, and that's totally fine. But a lot of people that I talk to, they want a mental health program, they want maybe a case management program, peer services, a yoga program, a wellness program. Anything you want, you can have under the nonprofit umbrella as long as it serves the community. You can have a coaching program, you can have a parent workshop, whatever desire you have to provide the community services, you can put as a program. For each program, you want a program description document. And so the reason why is because this is going to help you identify for each program the target population, the delivery model, an outcome that you plan to measure, and the budget. And so this matters because funders fund programs, not therapy in general. And so your standard operating procedures, which is your SOP, is the operating playbook that ties all of this together. So it's the clinical flow, every administrative workflow, every compliance procedure. It lives in your operating binder. It's reviewed annually, but it's used daily. Like you actually want to use this to operate so that everyone knows the same process, same procedure. All right, let's talk about hiring W-2s and credentialing early. So, two things that we need to nail down in phase four. One is when you hire clinicians, you should ideally hire them as W-2 employees, especially if they are unlicensed, you have to as W-2 employees. 1099 contractors are okay if they're licensed clinicians and they're really independent. So, it's important to get that distinction and not misclassify them. And then number two is credentialing. So every clinician on your team, including you, has to be credentialed with every payer that you want to bill. And that's if they're licensed. If they're pre-licensed and you're doing supervisory billing, they're not actually getting credentialed, but this is for licensed clinicians. So when you apply to things like TRICARE, the VA network, Medi-Cal, Medicaid. You credential the group, the nonprofit, and then you need to credential each licensed clinician under there. And then associates and interns can bill under your license doing supervisory billing. For certain payers, it does take a long time to get credentialed, so it's always good to start early with this process. So let's look at what this looks like in real time. So year one, quarter one, this is your formation and governance done, application for 501(c)(3), application for state Medicaid, EHR, and your tech stack live. Year two or year one, quarter two, you're actually launching your services. You have your first 30 to 50 clients, your first grant application submitted. Your one, quarter three is your 501(c)(3) status is granted by then. You probably are credentialed with Medicaid and you have that first Medicaid revenue coming in. And then year one, quarter four, you're stabilizing at 50 to 80 clients. You've filed your first annual report and renewal with the state and with the IRS. You're starting to see more consistent revenue with your Medicaid and Medi-Cal. And then year two, maybe you're bringing on a second clinician, you're credentialing them under Medicaid, and you start to expand your programs. And you can do this faster, slower, everyone is different. And then year three is your clinical team, maybe 3 to 4 people. You start to scale your mission, you start to think about how to grow in different ways and provide services. You want to master one program at a time. That's what I always tell people. When you try to do too many programs at once, you become a jack of all trades and master at none. So we want to build that arc up to scaling our nonprofit. So that's what we're building, and that's what it looks like. So that's a framework, the 4 phases, the 4 pillars in order: formation, governance, revenue, implementation. Each phase has its own work, its own pitfalls, and its own deliverables, and each phase rests on the one below it. You can't govern an entity that doesn't legally exist, and you can't fund an entity that has no governance, and you can't operate at a scale without sustainable financial model. So that's why the order matters, and that's why I built the framework specifically this way, because when you start to Google it, you get all kinds of mixed information. So where do we go from here? I have 2 paths that I offer people if you want to work with me, a done for you, where I build the entire document and each phase for you. It's customized to your state, your mission, your region. That's $9.97. I get it done for you in about 2 weeks. And then there's the nonprofit therapist framework mini courses. This is where it's do it yourself, but you're following my process that I do for the done for you path. So each course is $97. You can get the whole bundle for $297 until June 15th. Then after that, it goes up to $125. So if you're interested in that, let me know. Obviously, you can use this workshop to do it yourself. I gave you all the steps that you need. If you don't want any of those courses or the done for you, it's completely up to you. And I'll put this up here because I am running the special that ends on June 15th. So if you're watching the replay, you can reply and let me know if you want any of those links. And I'll actually put the link for the bundle in the chat, and then I'll open it up to questions. That is everything that I had to go over, though. Let's see. Yes, we can absolutely do a consult. So that's the link to the bundle. I'm going to link I do a free consult that's 30 minutes because I like to let you know exactly what's included. I'm just pulling up the link for the consult. Give me 1 second. I have it saved here. Here we go. So the consults are 30 minutes. We can go over all of your questions. I put that link there. All of your questions, anything you're hesitant on, any uncertainty, and no pressure to work with me. It's totally up to you. You can decide if it's a best fit. That's what most people come to me for, is like, oh, is this a good fit for me? Should I do this? And I'll just give you an honest answer of like, you should probably say a for-profit, or no, this really makes sense based on what you're really doing. So happy to do that consult, and then we'll go from there.